Mercedes just got hit with the one Monaco rule that could change everything. Not a penalty. Not a crash. Not a strategy mistake. A mandatory engine mode, forced by the FIA, that cuts the electric power advantage before Mercedes can fully use it. And here is the dangerous part. This rule was created for safety, because the new cars were predicted to reach terrifying speeds near the tunnel, where one tiny mistake can become impossible to save. But the effect is much bigger than safety. Mercedes loses one of its sharpest weapons. Ferrari suddenly gets the kind of battlefield it wanted. McLaren sees the gap shrink. Red Bull gets a door it was not supposed to have. And Monaco, the slowest, narrowest, most unforgiving race of the year, may become the place where Mercedes' dominance finally starts to crack. Because when the FIA forces every car into Rev 1 mode, the electric boost begins to fade at just 200 km/h, not near the top end like usual. That means the button still exists. The power still exists. But at Monaco, the magic disappears. And if Mercedes cannot win when its biggest advantage is taken away, the entire championship may have a new problem. Subscribe to the channel. At first, this sounds like a normal FIA safety decision. A narrow circuit. Faster cars. Less room for error. Simple. But Monaco is never simple. Because when the FIA looked at the data for these new cars, the concern was not just that they were fast. Formula 1 cars are supposed to be fast. That is the entire point. The problem was where they were fast. These new machines carry a much stronger electric punch than before, and that punch arrives in the speed range where Monaco becomes most dangerous. Not on some wide open straight with space to breathe, but in the exact places where the walls close in, the road bends, and the driver has almost no margin to recover. That is what made the FIA act. And that is what made Mercedes nervous. Because the rule was not designed to attack one team, but it hits the part of the car Mercedes wanted to trust the most. Power delivery. Electric acceleration. The ability to keep pulling when others begin to run out of road, confidence, or energy. At a normal circuit, that kind of advantage can stretch a gap. It can protect a driver on a straight. It can turn a defensive lap into a safe lap. It can make the car feel untouchable when the battery deploys exactly when the driver needs it. But Monaco takes that weapon and asks a brutal question. What if speed is no longer enough? Think about the tunnel. Every Formula 1 fan knows it, even if they have never studied a single technical regulation. The car disappears into the dark, the sound changes, the driver is committed, and then suddenly the light returns at the exit. There is no gentle reset. There is no wide space to correct a slide. The car fires out toward one of the most intense braking zones of the season. Now imagine that same moment with the new cars reaching more than 310 km/h. That is not just fast. That is a number that changes the feeling of the corner before it even arrives. Because at Monaco, speed is not measured only by the speed trap. It is measured by how quickly the wall comes toward you. It is measured by how little time the driver has to blink, breathe, and trust the car. And the FIA saw enough in the simulations to realize something had to be controlled before the weekend became a gamble. But here is the part most people miss. The FIA did not simply say, reduce the engine power. That would have been obvious. Instead, it created a much more specific restriction. A mandatory engine map called Rev 1, built to control when the electric power begins to fade. On most circuits, the electric deployment can keep working strongly until the car reaches around 290 km/h. That means the driver still gets a huge push deep into the acceleration zone. At Monaco, that changes completely. The reduction begins at just 200 km/h. That is the key number. 200 km/h. For a road car, that sounds wild. For Formula 1, it is not the end of acceleration. It is often the point where the car is still building speed, still loading up, still pushing hard. But in Monaco, under Rev 1, that is where the electric advantage starts being taken away. And for Mercedes, this is where the tension begins to grow. Because every team loses something, but not every team loses the same thing emotionally. Ferrari can look at Monaco and see a circuit where chassis performance, mechanical grip, and driver confidence matter more than raw power. McLaren can look at the same rule and see Mercedes being pulled closer. Red Bull can see a chance that would not exist at a more normal track. But Mercedes has to look at Rev 1 and accept that one of its cleanest advantages has been deliberately softened, in the one race where overtaking is already almost impossible. That creates pressure before the cars even leave the garage. Because qualifying in Monaco is not just important. It is almost the whole story. If you start behind the wrong car, you may spend the race staring at the gearbox, even if you are technically faster. So Mercedes cannot simply say, we will make it back on race pace. Monaco does not always allow that. They cannot simply say, "We will use the straight-line speed." The FIA has limited that. They cannot simply say, "We will press the button when we need more." Because at Monaco, that button no longer gives the same escape. And that is the strange part of this entire weekend. The hardware is still there. The power is still written into the regulations. The driver can still press the control. But the car will not answer in the same way. It is like reaching for a door handle during a fire drill and realizing the door is locked from the other side. You know what should happen. Your hand knows what should happen. But the system has already decided for you. That is why this rule feels so uncomfortable inside Mercedes. It removes certainty. And in Formula 1, certainty is one of the most valuable things a team can have. A driver wants to know exactly how the car will respond when they apply throttle at the exit of a corner. An engineer wants to know exactly where the energy will arrive and where it will begin to drop. A strategist wants to know whether defending track position is realistic, or whether the car will be vulnerable in the only places where an attack might be possible. Rev 1 changes all of that. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But quietly, corner by corner, straight by straight, lap by lap. And the deeper problem is that Monaco punishes hesitation. If a driver does not trust the car, the lap time disappears. If the car does not rotate cleanly, the walls start to feel closer. If the power delivery changes earlier than expected, the driver must adapt instantly, because there is no space to experiment. That is why the FIA's safety rule becomes a Mercedes storyline. It is not about conspiracy. It is not about favoritism. It is about consequences. The FIA looked at a dangerous speed problem and created a technical solution. But that solution lands hardest on the team whose advantage depends most clearly on the very thing being controlled. And once that happens, the entire Monaco weekend changes shape. Suddenly, Ferrari is not just hoping. McLaren is not just chasing. Red Bull is not just surviving. They all have a reason to believe the leader can be touched. And belief is dangerous in Formula 1. Because when rivals believe a dominant team can be beaten, they stop driving like outsiders. They take more confidence into qualifying. They pressure harder on strategy. They force the favorite to defend rather than simply control. That is the hidden cost for Mercedes. The FIA may have limited top speed, but it may also have limited intimidation. And at Monaco, where every lap feels like a trap waiting to close, that loss could matter more than the missing kilometers per hour. The first version of this story is easy to understand. The FIA saw a safety problem. The FIA introduced Rev 1. Mercedes lost part of its edge. But that is only the surface. Because the deeper conflict is not simply that the cars were too fast. The deeper conflict is that the fastest parts of the new Formula 1 rules were supposed to be the future of the sport. And now, at Monaco, the future has been partially switched off. That is what makes this so explosive. The new regulations were built around a very different kind of racing. More electrical power. More active systems. More intelligent energy use. Cars that do not just rely on a combustion engine, but on a carefully managed balance between electric boost, battery deployment, aerodynamic efficiency, and driver timing. It was meant to make Formula 1 feel modern. Smarter. Sharper. More advanced. But Monaco has exposed the uncomfortable truth. Not every historic circuit can safely handle every futuristic idea. And when the FIA forced Rev 1 onto the teams, it quietly admitted something very important. The full version of these cars is too much for Monte Carlo. That statement alone changes the tone of the weekend. Because Formula 1 loves progress. Teams spend fortunes chasing it. Engineers build entire careers around finding speed where nobody else can. Drivers trust that every new system will give them more control, more precision, more opportunity. But Monaco does not care how advanced the system is. Monaco only cares whether the car fits between the walls. And this year, that became the problem. The issue was not just top speed in a straight line. If it were, the solution would have been simpler. Add a speed control, adjust a deployment window, maybe tighten one part of the rules. But the FIA went further. It combined the mandatory engine mode with a full ban on active aerodynamics. That second decision is where the tension grows. Because active aerodynamics was one of the major selling points of this generation of Formula 1 cars. The idea was that the wings could behave differently depending on the part of the lap. More downforce when the driver needs grip. Less drag when the car needs to cut through the air. Think of it like wearing a backpack that can shrink when you run down a hallway, then expand again when you need balance on a staircase. On paper, it is clever. At Monaco, it became dangerous. Because opening the car up for straight-line efficiency, especially near the tunnel, could push the speeds into a zone the FIA was not willing to accept. The simulations suggested the cars could arrive at critical points faster than the circuit's margins allowed. And that is when the FIA made its most dramatic call. No active aerodynamics. Not during the race. Not during qualifying. Not even for a small advantage on the shortest main straight of the calendar. The cars would run fixed, loaded with downforce, trapped in a safer but slower configuration. For some teams, that is annoying. For Mercedes, it is a second hit. Because Mercedes was not just expected to benefit from electric deployment. It was also expected to use the complete package, power and efficiency together, to stretch its advantage when the track allowed it. Monaco now removes both tools at once. The electric power starts fading earlier. The aerodynamic trick is banned completely. And the famous advantage of being slippery on the straights matters far less on a circuit that now forces everyone into a high downforce fight. That is why this is not just a regulation story. It is a competitive trap. Mercedes can still be quick. Nobody should pretend otherwise. A team of that level does not suddenly become weak because one weekend changes the rules. But the shape of the contest is different now. Instead of asking which car has the most complete power unit, Monaco asks which car can survive slow corners with confidence. Instead of rewarding the team that can deploy energy most effectively at higher speeds, it rewards the team that can give the driver trust before the throttle is even fully open. Instead of letting a driver escape with a button press or a straight line setting, it forces them to win the old way. By placing the car perfectly. By feeling the grip. By brushing the limit without crossing it. And that is exactly why Ferrari suddenly becomes a serious part of the story. Ferrari does not need Monaco to become a normal circuit. Ferrari needs Monaco to become a chassis contest. A grip contest. A confidence contest. A race where every meter is about the front end biting, the rear staying calm, and the driver believing the car will not betray them at the wrong moment. Charles Leclerc knows that world better than almost anyone. At Monaco, he is not just another driver. He is carrying memory, pressure, expectation, and something that cannot be measured properly on a timing screen. Comfort. He understands the rhythm of the place. The way the lap flows from danger to danger. The way a small slide can feel huge. The way a perfect lap has to be built before it is attacked. And now the rules move the weekend closer to that kind of racing. That is why Mercedes cannot ignore Ferrari here. Not because Ferrari suddenly has the best engine. Not because the championship order has magically flipped, but because the FIA has dragged the race into Ferrari's preferred territory. And the same logic helps McLaren. McLaren may lose some of the straight-line benefit too, especially with the same Mercedes power unit influence in the background, but the bigger story is relative. If the strongest team loses more of its edge than the chasing team, the gap narrows. And in Monaco, a narrowed gap is not a small detail. It can be everything. Because you do not need to be faster by half a second to ruin someone's weekend. You only need to be close enough in qualifying. Close enough on strategy. Close enough to pressure the driver into using one more inch of track than the wall allows. That is how Monaco works. It turns small gaps into huge consequences. A car that is only slightly closer on Saturday can become impossible to pass on Sunday. A rival that would normally fade on a long straight can survive here, because the straight is short and the FIA has taken away the tools that would usually punish them. This is why the Mercedes garage faces a problem that is bigger than lap time. They are not only fighting Ferrari, McLaren, and Red Bull. They are fighting the circuit. They are fighting the regulation package. They are fighting the psychology of being the hunted team when the hunt suddenly feels possible. And this is where the conflict becomes personal. For George Russell and Kimi Antonelli, Monaco under these rules is not just about extracting performance. It is about adapting faster than the story around them changes. They must drive a Mercedes that may still be excellent, but not excellent in the same way people expected. The car can no longer rely as easily on its electric punch to create distance. It cannot use active aerodynamics to reduce drag and build speed in selected areas. It cannot turn Monaco into a normal performance equation. So the drivers have to do something much harder. They have to make a restricted car feel unrestricted. That means committing earlier. Trusting the brakes. Rotating the car cleanly. Getting on throttle with precision, even when the energy delivery is shaped by a mandatory map rather than pure driver demand. And if that sounds technical, the human version is simple. They have to drive with total confidence while knowing one of their safety blankets is gone. A driver can feel that. They may not describe it dramatically. They may speak calmly. They may say the car feels fine, the team understands the situation, the data looks useful. But inside the cockpit, the truth is sharper. When you press the throttle, you want the car to answer. When you ask for deployment, you want the response you expect. When you exit a corner at Monaco, you do not want a moment of doubt. Doubt is expensive everywhere. At Monaco, doubt is terrifying. And that brings the story back to the FIA. Because the FIA's decision may be correct for safety, but correctness does not make it comfortable. Every team understands why the speed had to be controlled. Nobody wants cars flying out of the tunnel beyond what the circuit can safely absorb. Nobody wants unpredictable energy drop-off creating danger in traffic.